Hello, everyone, and welcome to this presentation on unpacking concepts in a literature review. Really, this is about how we talk about our terminology and the concepts that we're using in a literature review. My name is Cecile Badenhorst, and I'm a professor in the adult post-secondary program at Memorial University. And if you don't already know this, I have a number of videos on writing the literature review, mostly because the literature review is one of the most complex pieces of writing that we do. So I've tried to break down the literature review into bite-sized pieces, and the videos are all based on questions that people have asked me over time. And this is one of the questions that comes up all the time. How do we explain our concepts? So the purpose of this workshop is to look at how we can unpack core concepts. And by doing that, by engaging with our concepts, what we also do is it's almost like we bring that intellectual lens, that deep level of scholarship to our literature reviews. So that's the aim. That's what we're trying to do here. I want to just preface the workshop by saying that although I'm giving you these talks or workshops, these are not rules, right? All I'm trying to do is make what long-term academic writers do almost automatically because it's become implicit for them. I'm trying to make that explicit. So these aren't rules, they aren't formulas. They are just, I'm trying to open a door to show you, and hopefully you will take what I've done here today and apply it to your own discipline. In your own discipline, the way you unpack the concepts might be a little different. In the sciences, you might need to be much more succinct. You might not, you might explain your concepts in a sentence or two. And in other disciplines, you might go into it in much more detail than I'm suggesting here. Obviously, I'm speaking from my own discipline, so that's where I'm situating things, but I'm trying to make it more general so that you can see what I mean and then take what you need from that. The other thing that I really want to emphasize is that when you sit down to write a literature review, it's a very complex piece of writing that requires higher order thinking. And if you sit down to write it just like that, you're going to find that it'll feel overwhelming and you don't want to do it. So instead, break it up into thinking and pre-writing activities. And this workshop is all around the thinking. And maybe you will think through writing. I'm hoping you will. I'll encourage you to think through writing. But this is not about writing the literature review. It's about the thinking that goes into it before you write that section. Okay. So what are concepts? A concept is usually a core term that we use in a study. We use these concepts to classify, to describe, or to explain components of our research topics. So if I use education as an example, other concepts might be training or facilitation, but each of those means something different. So we need to unpack our concepts because there is this potential for misunderstanding. In academic contexts, knowledge is contested. Not everyone agrees on meaning, and I think it's safe to say that possibly no one agrees on meaning. If I use education, this may be interpreted as instruction, which might not be what I mean. So I would need to explain that difference, which might be quite subtle. And in explaining the difference, we're situating ourselves in a body of literature. Another reason why we have to unpack concepts is because they change over time. So, if we show how meaning has changed over time and where we are aligning ourselves, because we might think an earlier meaning is more valid, we're showing our reader exactly where we're positioning ourselves. Another reason for unpacking concepts is that there are always debates over meaning. And someone proposes a meaning, someone else objects to that meaning. And we're not talking about, like head-on disputes. We're talking about subtle variations side by side. So it might be this person says the concept means this, and another person says, well, actually, we need to add something to that. So it's not always in opposition disputes. The disputes might be quite subtle. But we need to make our concepts and the assumptions we're making clear so our readers can understand. Another reason why we need to unpack our concepts is that they are often tied to worldviews. So we always come to research from a particular perspective. For example, if we use the term instruction, what's embedded in that term instruction is that we value teachers and teaching as the most important part of this relationship. Learners are somewhat passive in this conceptualization. If we use facilitation, then we view teachers as co-constructors and learners are much more active in that relationship. So both those concepts are tied to particular worldviews of education. The meanings in concepts are often tied to values and assumptions, and we need to explain this to our readers. Linked to this is that concepts can be tied to theoretical frameworks. So if we take student-centered learning, for example, which comes from student-centered, and learning, concepts that have been put together to form a new concept that presents a particular perspective of education. So we want to explain that kind of the theoretical roots of that concept. We don't want to assume our reader will know. There are lots of different ways to unpack concepts, but these are just a few, and I'm going to go through a few examples as well. One is tracing the evolution of a concept from, earlier times to currently. And one of the ways to do that is to take all your articles or books and put them in date order and read them in date order. Then you can see the unfolding debates. Breaking the concept into component parts, which essentially is an analysis because then you would compare the component parts. Show how a concept has been used in different contexts or places because, if a concept has been developed in the US, that doesn't necessarily mean it can be applied elsewhere in the world. So that geographical or contextual difference can give insight to a concept. And then, of course, outlining the debates and the objections to meaning. If we take writing anxiety, which is one of the concepts I have used a lot, we might explore how different disciplines have defined the concepts. We might look at earlier studies, compare them to current studies, and see if there are changes over time. And we want to align ourselves with perhaps a definition or a grouping of definitions with a justification of why. So if we focus on the concept itself and what it represents, really what we're doing is we're describing that concept with a lot of information so that the reader can see exactly what it looks like, what the characteristics are, the attributes. Writing anxiety is a multidimensional construct that consists of dispositional attitudes as well as situational attitudes. So already you're getting a bit more information about what that concept is, rather than assuming the reader will know. Another way you'll see it quite often in the literature is where the author will focus on the word and break it up, that, either tracing the roots of the word or looking at synonyms of the word to try and get at the essence of meaning. Anxiety generally is a feeling of worry or nervousness about something with an uncertain outcome. For psychologists, anxiety is a nervous disorder. focusing on the evolution of the concept. This is a really common method that we see in the literature all the time, locating the concept in time and place and showing the history of meaning and the changes over time. Early studies in the US viewed writing anxiety as whatever, whatever. However, from the 1990s, research conceptualization of writing anxiety shifted, current definitions. So, in a paragraph, you can show that evolution. Discussing the debates around a concept, Stacks and Jones included procrastination behaviors in their definitions of writing anxiety. Cheng, however, focused on. So you're positioning one against the other. Tracing the theoretical roots, behavioral views of writing anxiety locate anxiety within individual behavior, while social constructivist views suggest that the prevalence of writing anxiety is due to pressures from social expectations. So, because these are thinking processes before you begin writing, it's worthwhile thinking about when you are reading and processing exactly what you're doing. So, one of the things you're doing is looking at these knowledge-based elements. So, these are the elements that describe the concepts, that examine the way the research literature has used these concepts, and you're noting what other researchers see as important. So, for example, you're building descriptions. So you could write paragraphs on a concept about so and so describes this concept like this. Somebody else describes this concept like that, so that you can see the difference. And you can provide some examples as well. So these knowledge-based elements are all around the description of the concept. But when you are unpacking your concept, you are also developing your own argument, particularly in a literature review. So you need to think of these elements of argument as well. So where do you see the gaps and the absences in the definitions? Where are you locating where do you think the meaning lies, the most useful meaning lies, and why? So, really, by doing that, you are identifying what is important. So, in a way, what you're doing with the argument elements is that you are deciding why meanings are more important than other meanings, and then you're going to mark that for the reader. So, these are just to make a differentiation between the two levels, in a way, of engagement with concepts. One is describing them as they are in the literature, and the other is positioning your argument around them. So I want to go through a couple of examples here. And when you do start looking at a concept and you want to unpack a concept, you often don't have to begin at year dot in the beginning, because hopefully somebody else will have written a paper like this about your particular concept. Conceptual papers are really quite popular in academic writing because we are always really interested in how concepts are contested and how meaning changes. And it would be a good idea just to read some of these papers to get a sense of, what I'm talking about here. But I'm just going to read it and you'll see. So, social innovation, which is the concept here, is a contested concept with multiple meanings that have implications beyond academia. It's not a new term. Its sociological heritage can be dated to the late 19th century. However, until the 21st century, the concept was sparsely utilized, and despite its current popularity among policymakers in Europe and the United States, remains largely ignored by social policy researchers. Through bibliometric analysis, we identify the most influential articles on social innovation and explore how these have conceptualized the term. We show that over time, social innovation has taken on a set of meanings far removed from its sociological roots. In particular, we identify a weak tradition that sees social innovation as any increase in aggregate individual utility arising from an innovation, and a strong tradition that focuses on the process of collaboration between different groups and the restructuring of power relations. We conclude by outlining implications for social policy research. So you can see in this paper that from the sentence, in particular, we identify a weak tradition. You can see that they are positioning themselves there. They're taking a stand on, and they're indicating that to the reader what they think is important and where they think the concept has changed. Here's another example. This essay traces the evolution of children's geographies. This is the concept, right? As a concept through three phases. So they've organized it into three phases. That's a good technique as well. Grouping and sequencing. First, in the early 1970s, as a beginning impression, influenced heavily by developmental and environmental psychology. Second, beginning around 1990, children's geographies cohered politically as geographers focused on young people's identity through feminism and Marxism and global policy initiatives on children's rights. And the third phase covering the last couple of decades, coming from issues of political identity, challenges what we think we know about young people and their geographies, and also advocates a set of loose theories about the ways young people create and recreate spaces and themselves. So what you can see about that bit there is they are tracing the concept chronologically, but also theoretically. Cognate disciplines coming to geography for insights about children and their worlds characterize this current phase. To offset the seeming linear progression, the essay also notes an involution of the concept that defines clear categories and sequences, but suggests a fluidity of tensions and accommodations that comprises children's geographies. So, what they've said at the end, which is really interesting, is that although if you trace something chronologically, you expect to have a linear progression, there are it's more recursive and fluid. So ideas go back to earlier ideas and then come forward again and then move back again. So it's not necessarily this one line of thinking that changes over time. That's an interesting thing to think about when you unpacking a concept. Here's an introduction to a paper. Validity is not a simple concept in the context of educational measurement. Measuring the traits or attributes that a student has learned during a course is not like measuring an objective property, such as length or weight. Measuring educational achievement is less direct. So I just want to point out this is a conceptual paper, but they have begun with a problem as well. Yet educational outcomes can have high stakes in terms of consequences affecting access to further education. Thus, the validity of assessments is highly important. The concept of validity is not a new one. Conceptualizations of validity are apparent in the literature from about the turn of the 20th century. And since that time, they have evolved significantly. So even that sentence, they've given you a clue of changing meaning. Earliest perceptions of validity were that of a static property captured by a single statistic. So there's the description of early perceptions of validity. Usually an index of the correlation of text scores with some criterion. Through various reconceptualizations, contemporary validity theory generally sees validity as the appropriateness of the inferences and uses made from assessment outcomes, including some consideration of the consequences of test score use. This article traces the progress and changes in the theorization of validity over time, and the issues that led to these changes. Okay, so that would be a good example to look at as well. Right, let's look at how we can practically um, begin to unpack our concepts. And, there are a lot of tools that you can use, and I'm sure you do use them, and you probably have more than I have here. But tables are really useful because you can look at, you don't want to have too much information in the tables, but you want enough so that you can compare and begin to map out these concepts over time. And you can change the headings, make something more relevant to what you're doing, but use the tables as flexibly as you need to use them. Very useful tool. I'm always promoting the idea of doing things visually as a pre-writing activity. So any kind of mind map, organic map, conceptual mapping, any kind of diagram is really helpful. If you're putting, especially if you're getting things out of your head onto paper, you can put the citation with the page number so that you can go back to the actual page. But it allows you to see things holistically, drawing things out, sketching timelines. And then once you've done that, do some free writing. So once you've done a bit of reading, free write a paragraph on, what does this author think about this concept? You could also write some short definitions, author so and so, one small paragraph on how that author sees this concept. Go on to the next paper, small paragraph on how that author sees this concept. So these are knowledge-based elements. You're building these bits and pieces. You can do small comparisons, write a paragraph comparing the two. All these little bits and pieces will help you write the draft when you come to writing the draft. Rather than starting from nothing, you're starting from a lot of information there. So again, using diagrams to organize and sequence your thinking. They don't have to be as neat as this. I'm just using the tools that come with the PowerPoint. But you can make them messy. I would prefer handwritten diagrams because I think they allow you to think more freely. But diagrams, using timelines, the evolution of a concept over time, where you can just jot down little points, maybe authors, mapping out ideas. And again, you don't have to do it in such a linear way as is presented here, but mapping out different components, drawing out the path that a concept has taken over time. So I just want to go through this one more example. I want to go through this last example to show you what this particular author has done. Thick description is a really common concept, one that people use in qualitative research. So Pontoretto has done an analysis of the concept of thick description. So this is what the author says in the beginning. The goals of this brief note are to clarify the origins of the concept thick description, trace its evolution across various disciplines, define the concept comprehensively, provide exemplars of thick description in the published literature, offer guidelines for presenting thick description in non-ethnographic studies. Okay, so first of all, what I like about this is the author has broken up the process. And this is something that you could think about. Looking at the origins, tracing the evolution, defining the concept. Providing examples is always a good idea because it helps clarify things for your reader. In meeting these goals, I hope to bring some clarity and consensus to our understanding and usage of the concept of thick description. So all the way through the paper, Pontoretto shows the lineage of concepts, the disputes, and how the concept has changed. So Geertz borrowed Ryle's philosophical term. Geertz's adaptation was expanded by Denson's elaboration of thick description introduced, and so on. Okay, so you can see as a reader, you can see the connections and the differences. A search for more specific definitions of thick description led me to 2 dictionaries of qualitative terms and concepts. So then looking at the dictionaries would show accepted usage of the term. So what Pontoretto has done now is to look at what the dictionaries are saying and link that to the origins of the term. There are some commonalities both in Schwann's and Holloway's definitions. So looking for commonalities is also a good idea. So integrating the work of Ryle, Geertz, Denson, Holloway, and Schwand, one can extract the following essential components of thick description. And then Pontoretto came up with the essential components of thick description. Essentially, Pontoretto comes to a working definition of thick description from the analysis. So what I really wanted to show you, I'm not suggesting that you need to do this unless you're doing a conceptual paper. But I just wanted to give you some ideas of not only organizing, but it doesn't necessarily have to always be, one against the other, but you can also look for consistencies and commonalities. But perhaps then coming to an argument about what would be the essential components or a working definition. So in the end, what I'm trying to get across here is that what Pontoretto did was he read all he could on the concept. He organized his thinking. I think it's a he. I should just say the author organized the material, so grouped it so that the reader it makes it more palatable for the reader. Came up with a working definition and a conclusion. So the conclusion is this is a good, solid working definition based on all that analysis. So it's not just about unpacking the concept, it's about coming to a conclusion about it as well. So I want to show you how you can use your problem purpose statement and questions to identify the concepts. If you don't know what a problem purpose statement and questions are, I have a number of videos on this, so please go and have a look at that. But essentially, it's a technique to help you conceptualize your research, and it gets you to think about it. It's like a half a page to a 1 page, and it gets you to think about the research problem, the knowledge gap, the conceptual framework, the context that the research is taking place in, the purpose statements, and the research questions. So this is the example that I'm going to use of a PPS and Q, a problem, purpose statement, and questions. So once you are happy with your problem, purpose statement, and questions, and you feel like you can move forward now, you've spent a lot of time thinking and conceptualizing the research, usually you will have a working title, and the working title generally contains the most important concepts. So don't forget to include that and highlight or underline those concepts. Then go through your PPS and Q and highlight or underline the concepts that you think are really important, that need to be explained to a reader, because there might be some doubt about the meaning. You can see that I've highlighted 2 in blue. So this is where I'm saying to myself, is this a concept I need to unpack? Or is that something that is important, but it's going to step into the background? It's not going to be a concept for this particular project. because you don't want to have too many concepts. It's very confusing for a reader if you have lots and lots of concepts. You want to try and focus on the absolutely key ones and let the others move into the background. So once you've identified them, you can list them and then again have a look. Because sometimes you need to combine, if I just look at emotions, for example, that's going to be a massive literature. And really, what I'm looking at is doctoral students and emotions. The same thing with writing. I'm really looking at doctoral students and writing. So I've got their emotions and writing, but really what I'm looking at is doctoral students, emotions, and writing. So this is what you're doing. You're going through each one, you're looking at it, you're saying, is that specific enough? Do I really need to unpack that or not? And you create a list. So, for example, at the last one, ethic of care, interpersonal relationships, relational ontology, do I need all three? Or can I write it in a way that will explain it, really easily without getting lost in a whole bunch of concepts? So once you've got that, this is just extracting from the problem purpose statement. The next step would be to group and to reorder and to really, I would say, interrogate whether or not these are the right concepts in relation to your particular study. And if the concepts are too broad, then you need to limit them further. If they are too narrow, you might need to open them up a bit. But essentially, these would become your search terms that you would search through the library systems to find articles or books. They could also turn into the headings of different sections in the literature review, so they can become a plan. So that's why you might want to reorder things. And generally, it's not a rule, but generally you're going from the general to the specific. So you want to begin with the broader concept and go down to the more focused concept that is key, the absolutely key thing for your study. So you can then order that list so that they become headings for your literature review, or at least group them and then attach a heading. Okay, I've provided, the references with examples there so you can have a look at them. It's quite a complex process unpacking your concepts, but I would say just begin, make sure you're keeping notes, develop tables and tools to think through it. And you know, um, once you've got enough material to help you begin writing, then start writing. Don't start writing first. Thinking and then writing, but you can think through writing as well. I hope this was helpful, and I hope it will help you to think through your concepts in your literature reviews, and I hope there's something you can take away from this. Good luck.